Hello Scotland fans, welcome back. It's our first castle of the year and we're going right in the deep end. One of the most spectacular castles, not just in Scotland but I would argue in the whole wide world. It's an absolute beauty and it's Dunnottar.
Yeah, it's one of these castles which, I mean, we do a lot of this stuff because we're big kids inside, really. Right?
Sure.
And when you see Dunnottar Castle, I mean, it just ignites every little bit of imagination and wonder and awe that inner little kid has when you're talking about things like castles and standing stones. Do you even remember the first time you saw it?
I think I saw it as a child. It was a distant memory. When I returned the first time as an adult was probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I did remember it vaguely from maybe a school trip or something, or a family trip.
Yeah.
But it was coming at it from an adult's point of view, and having seen some spectacular things travelling Scotland, of course, as we do, that was still just like, wow, how is this possible?
Yeah.
Physically, geographically, atmospherically, how has it got this incredible geography to it, but also a brilliant backstory which takes it above most of the other castles because it combines the spectacular and the dramatic with a terrific backstory.
Exactly. I mean, Dunnottar Castle probably made my jaw hit the floor quicker and harder than any other castle in Scotland. That is saying something. And the beauty of it is, exactly as you say, it's not just great to look at. It is one of the crucibles of Scotland. I mean, this is one of the, the anvils upon which Scotland was forged.
Yes,
love that. Going right back to sort of the most ancient periods. I mean, we don't know when it was first settled. The castle, of course, is medieval, but people were living on that ridiculously improbable promontory jutting out into the North Sea just outside Stonehaven for thousands of years. So there was a fortress there long before there was a castle. And I mean, the people living there probably watched as the Roman legions marched north to fight at the Battle of Mons Graupius.
So we're going back to Pictish time. I mean, when we think of Scottish castles, generally you're thinking 13th century, 14th century, and although some of the ruins date to that point, the history of this place goes way further back.
Absolutely. I mean, there's kind of an analogy I like to use with a lot of these places which, tend to be recycled as sites of fortification because, again, you've got the castle, but you have a lot earlier settlement. So there's this little saying, that this is my grandfather's axe. I replaced the handle, my father replaced the blade. It's like, that's still your grandfather's axe, but it's made of completely different components. And that's kind of the way it works with Dunnottar Castle. It's been continuously fortified for ages, just in different ways. And just north of Dunnottar Castle, actually, is the oldest Pictish fort yet discovered in Scotland at a place called Dunnottar. And it's actually a sea stack. So it's completely cut off from the mainland, unlike Dunnottar, which is, as you know, just connected by this narrow defile, which sort of plunges down and up again, this tiny, narrow pass, which feels very daunting to go even now in modern times. Never mind 600 years ago when you would have had guys shooting bows and crossbows and flinging axes and stuff out off the walls.
Love a good siege. And bringing it forward, we can't focus on the entire history of it in a short video because there's far too many chapters and individuals that have been through here. But one of the next big chapters after the Pictish stuff was the Wars of Independence. And William Wallace, of course, hero of Braveheart, Scottish patriot, guardian of Scotland, and he was here and he attacked Edward I's forces within the castle. Is that right?
He did, because the English forces at that time had occupied the vast majority of castles in Scotland. Only, I believe, 5 held out, actually, and we're talking out of hundreds upon hundreds. And there was an English garrison at Dunnottar Castle, and you might recall that scene in Braveheart. It's pretty brutal, I remember as a kid watching it, that was one of the scenes that made me kind of go, I'm a bit scared now, actually, I don't think this William Wallace was a very nice guy. You'll recall the scene where, he pushes these English soldiers into a thatched hut, pours oil into it, it drips all over them, and then sets them on fire. I mean, this is brutal stuff. And we are talking about William Wallace, who, took de Hesselrig, the treasure of Scotland, and flayed him after the Battle of Stirling Bridge and allegedly used that skin for his sword hilt. So that's the kind of guy we're dealing with here.
He was not a fan of the English at the time.
It was Hugh de Cressingham rather than de Cressingham. There you go. Got to get your treasure straight.
Hesselrig was was further back, wasn't he?
Well, Hesselrig was the overall commander, whereas Hugh de Cressingham was the commander.
Yes,
exactly.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But he did this at Dunnottar. He stormed the castle and basically stuffed the English garrison inside the chapel of all places.
Nice.
It's a little bit of sacrilege along with your sacking, right? And set it on fire, and they were burned alive inside. So definitely one of the bloodier and more brutal episodes in Dunnottar's history, and that is really saying something.
Yeah, and that's from an incredibly interesting chapter in Scotland's past. This is around about the 1300s, and for that to have been one of the standout moments is already an achievement, given William Wallace's rather illustrious career.
Oh, completely. And you pair that up with guys like James the Black Douglas, who had some pretty infamous deeds under his belt as well. I mean, this is right up there with the darkest of them, for sure. But then, there were so many other sort of dark periods in Dunnottar's history as well. Should say, before we get into that the castle itself was built by the Keiths, and they were the Marechals of Scotland. Marechal is marshal. They were responsible for a number of things. For instance, protecting the king when he went to Parliament, protecting the royal regalia, and commanding the king's horse. So Keith led the Scots cavalry at the Battle of Bannockburn, for instance. So these are the guys who built up Dunnottar Castle in the way that we now sort of know and love it. But there was another episode where Covenanters, who were effectively sort of radical Presbyterians, were fighting against the king, and they were imprisoned in a vault in Dunnottar Castle. And it's a tiny vault. You can go in there to this day, and it was something like well over 140, I believe, Covenanters were kept inside this space, which is barely large enough for 20-25 people.
Yes.
And it said that they didn't even have enough room to sit down, never mind lay down, and many of them just died where they stood. Just appalling conditions. And some of them actually tried to escape by climbing out of the chamber, don't know how they managed that, and then scrambling down the rock. Now, imagine that in your head if you've been there, right? What do you think?
You guys have seen this from above with the drone activity and everything. You can see how cut off this is.
Imagine being completely malnourished, starved, tired, utterly demoralized. You've probably lost several of your friends and family. Then you decide to do a little bit of rock climbing to escape this. Several of the Covenanters did plunge to their deaths. The rest were recaptured, and they were actually dealt with in various ways. Some were sent down to the Market Cross in Edinburgh, where we're filming this, and were executed. Others were put on ships and sent as slaves to plantations in the West Indies. So the Covenanters, really did not come well out of this particular episode. Even though in the long run, you could argue they won the long game, but certainly suffered immensely in the short run.
And talk about then the honours of Scotland, because that was a key part, if not the most important part, of the Dunnottar story. And this brings in Oliver Cromwell, who we've talked about in our previous castle videos. He's the token bad guy, along with Edward the Longshanks, of course, who always seems to come in and destroy things. So he's decimated Scotland's built heritage. But he was a visitor to Dunnottar with one of the most famous sieges in Scottish history. Yeah,
it was one of his generals who laid siege to Dunnottar Castle, and it was 1651, and the honours of Scotland, sort of the royal regalia, the sceptre, the sword, the shiny crown, the bling, basically, was kept in Dunnottar because it was seen as the safest place in the kingdom, which, I mean, looking at it makes sense, doesn't it?
Total sense.
Yeah, if you want to keep something safe, that seems like a pretty good spot.
There's no way to get at it from sea, because you just crash into the rock.
Not happening.
It's only one way in, one way out. And as long as you've got a fortification with weapons and arrows, presumably you can defend that. Yeah, I think it was something like just under 70 Scots defenders using about 42 guns up against several thousand of Cromwell's troops. So that's just quintessential Scotsman for you. Like, oh, we're hopelessly outnumbered. Excellent, it's an even fight then. You can picture them lining up along that whole coastline, facing out into the North Sea, probably with dreadful weather, because it usually is up there.
Yeah.
In this tiny little narrow pass. It's a bit like Stirling Bridge, the same kind of idea of using a small space to your advantage and turning numbers against them.
Yeah.
How Scottish.
Exactly, right? So the siege went on and on and on. It lasted about 8 months. So you got 70 guys holding out against thousands for 8 months. I mean, this is epic stuff that we're talking about, right? Yeah. But eventually, they realised, okay, we're really settling in for the long run here. We're running out of resources, food, water, all that kind of stuff. I don't think we're going to be able to hold out indefinitely, so they had to come up with a bit of a plan to smuggle out the honours of Scotland, because this is one of the key symbols of the nation. They could not allow this to be taken into Cromwell's hands.
Yes,
right?
it's our crown jewels.
Yeah, and so for these stories, guys, I mean, there's so many books which delve into the stories behind Scotland's castles. One of my favourites is by Nigel Tranter, who I like to call the original castle hunter, and it's Tales and Traditions of Scottish Castles, and rather than just doing it off the top of our heads, figured I'll read what Nigel Tranter had to say. So it was Cromwell's General Lambert who came to besiege the castle, and in time, with starvation facing the garrison, it was decided that somehow the honours of Scotland should be smuggled out before the place fell. This was contrived in ingenious fashion. The minister of the nearby Kenneth parish, the Reverend James Granger, and his brave wife now played the undying role in history. Christian Granger was friendly with the wife of George Ogilvy of Barras, the Earl Marshal's Lieutenant Governor of Dunnottar, and one day she presented herself on horseback and with a maid before Major General Morgan, whom Lambert had left to conduct the siege, requesting his permission to visit Mrs. Ogilvy, since she said she was sure that English gentlemen did not make war on women. It's not like, they put Robert Bruce's wife and daughters in cages outside various English cities or anything. No, they would never do such a thing. Thereafter, with Mrs. Ogilvy's aid, she pushed Scotland's crown up under her skirts and wrapped the orb and sceptres in lint to look like a distaff, and with her servant carrying these, made her presumably very awkward way out and down. It is said that Morgan, quite dazzled by Mrs. Granger's charms, for she must have looked a great deal more pregnant than when she arrived, actually and gallantly aided the lady up onto her horse. So here's this woman who's smuggling out the honours, bluffing right in the face of one of her main adversaries, and he's like, "Oh, here, madam, allow me to help you up onto your horse and have a good day."
Sorry for the inconvenience.
Brilliant stuff, right? What an absolute legend. At any rate, she got the regalia safely back to Kenneth, where she and her husband put it all under their box bed, but later, for security's sake, buried it beneath the pulpit of the church one night, the subject of a famous and dramatic painting. We'll see if we can't pull that up for the viewers as well. In due course, at the restoration, the precious relics were handed over to King Charles.
Fabulous.
I mean,
what a story.
Boldness, audacity, just bluffing right again in the face of something. I mean, that's just quintessential Scottish ferocity, isn't it?
Yeah, she's another one of these females, like Flora MacDonald, the same kind of thing. Absolutely. Who takes the initiative and uses the fact that she is a female to her advantage, because she's not going to be scrutinised in the same way that a man would coming out. He would never have got a man.
Oh, no, never would have happened.
It's a wonderful chapter. So, we've looked at that, but it's also a very famous castle on the screen, Dunnottar, because that was probably the last chapter of it, really, because it kind of fell into disrepair after the siege.
It did, yeah. After Cromwell's siege, it never really bounced back as a lordly fortress. The Covenanters were kept in the prison after Cromwell's siege, about 30 years later, so it was used as a prison, but that's about all it was good for at that point, after it had been devastated by Cromwell's cannons.
Until the cameras came up.
There you go, so then it became this fantastically, sort of romantic ruin that a lot of artists and poets wrote about and painted, and it became a bit of a star of the screen as well. You had, I believe it was 2015, am I getting that right? 2013, 2015's Mary Queen of Scots. 2015 sounds right, They used it as one of the filming locations. It was also used for Dr. Frankenstein, and it fit probably most notably. It was one of the major inspirations behind the Dunbroch family castle in the Disney film Brave. And you can see why. I mean, when you watch that film, that fantastic cliff-top castle with the sun glimmering down on it. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. Sun in the northeast, I can't fathom it. Every now and again, in fairness, it does get very beautiful up there. Some spectacular sunsets from Dunnottar as well.
And speaking of, in that area, we did a campaign last year, Northeast 250, with the kind of circuit route that goes around the northeast of Scotland, takes in, kind of just misses Dunnottar really, but if we were heading up the coast, you can be looking at other castles, other similarly dramatic ones like New Slains, which is a beauty, and then continuing further past that towards Fraserburgh, the lighthouse centre up there is fantastic, beautiful coastline, quite rugged in parts, but with some nice beaches now and again as well.
Yeah, so you can easily work Dunnottar into sort of a larger itinerary in that area. One of the ways I would recommend going is, that area is known as the Mearns, and it's basically where sort of the highlands start to creep in towards the coast, and Dunnottar, one of its historical historical functions was sort of protecting that passageway into that sort of corridor into the Highlands. And so you can follow that corridor and go to places like, Ballater and Braemar, stop off at some of the amazing sort of fairy tale-esque castles like Crathis and Craigivar, which I know you're a big fan of, Neil.
Yes, it's very pink and romantic.
It is. You can imagine Rapunzel's hair just sort of twirling out of one of the windows, right?
It's beautiful. An Instagram classic, that one.
Absolutely. So there's loads to do in the area. You can't actually get to Dunnottar, the old Pictish fortress, because again, it's a sea stack, but you can go just north along the shore and see it, and it is absolutely spectacular. Stonehaven itself is worth a go, though.
It is.
It's got one of the coolest Hogmanay festivities anywhere in Scotland. So on New Year's Eve, it's called the Stonehaven Fireballs, and it sounds absolutely mad, and it kind of is. There are a number of locals, usually between 50 to 60, of all ages, and they have flaming fireballs attached on sort of chain ropes in metal baskets, and they swing them around their heads, fling them up into the air. How the whole town doesn't burn down every Hogmanay, I don't know. But it is one of
health and safety.
No, don't need all that newfangled nonsense, right? But if you ever get the chance to be in Stonehaven for Hogmanay, it's absolutely unforgettable. One of the strangest, most spectacular ways to ring in the new year that I could possibly imagine.
Yes, and it's just a short walk from the village to the castle, incidentally, as well, which is accessible by public transport or just off the motorway if you're heading up to the northeast.
The way I've got there is just getting the train into Stonehaven. And then I tend to cycle out there, which you can do along the main roads, but I actually prefer going down to the coastal path and then walking along the coast, which gives you extended amazing views in profile of the castle. So that's probably the optimal way of doing it if you're up for it.
Yeah, I think we'll have to focus more on the northeast in future videos, but that's all we've got time for on this one. But if you are going up to that part of the world, this is one spot you most certainly do not want to miss.
Alright, and we'll see you on the next one. If you have enjoyed this, do all the usual good stuff, like, subscribe, and join us for many more castle and history and scenic adventures in the future. Catch you on the next one.
See you soon.